Today we're gonna rank traditional Chicago building types from S to D. So we have a variety of building types from really classic pre-1900 up to stuff that we continue to see today. So let's start with the American Foursquare, and we're gonna give it an A ranking. Why? In Chicago, you primarily see these on a little bit wider lots. You have a more square layout, and you get better living space. We're so used to having these long, narrow buildings in Chicago. So these are on the rarer side, and I mean, kind of like anything, the more rare they are, the more valuable, the more desirable they are. So we're gonna give that an A. Next up, we're gonna have the Cape Cod. I'm gonna give Cape Cod a C rating. I hate those little dormers that they have, that like these little spy houses. They're primarily for looks. These second floors are always too narrow. You don't have a lot of room to position beds, etc. I think they're very attractive, but yeah, I don't really like them. Next, we have the Chicago Bungalow. I would argue that across the city from like south side to the north side, this is probably the most common. And I'm actually gonna go against what I just said. Usually the more rare, the more desirable. These are potentially the most common and also happen to be pretty desirable. What I and many buyers appreciate about them is they have like this huge bay area on the front living room that kind of opens up. It's not a box. You know, they were one of the first building types to have that side entrance, as opposed to the majority of Chicago building types as we, go through them here, you have that front entrance, and you actually see that a lot more today. Next up, we have the frame stucco bungalow. We're gonna put this firmly in the D position. I hate stucco. Here in Chicago, it expands, it contracts. It's especially gone out of favor in the last 50 years, so it's hard to get quality work for it. It's one of those things for me where it just is like a sign of the age of a home. People don't choose to build with stucco often at all here in Chicago. So if you see a stucco home, for me, it just triggers issues. I think if you're a real estate guy or girl in Chicago and you see a Chicago Greystone, you put it at the top of the list, period. If you choose 10 real estate agents or 10 real estate investors here in Chicago, I would argue 9 of them have a dream of converting a classic Chicago Greystone into a single family. It's top echelon of what real estate people want to do. Moving on, we have the Modernish Ranch. I love these. Looks like I'm stacking up the A tier. We might slide it down into the B tier. Let's see how I feel by the end of this little rant I give. The Modernish Ranch was kind of made famous by Frank Lloyd Wright. And from a visual perspective, gorgeous, unique. I'm not entirely sure why everything was built on a smaller scale. Doorways were narrower, kitchens were smaller. Like you get into these showers and you're kind of like turning sideways. And I think it was the 1950s, they were so concerned with the way things looked and having these clean lines. For that reason, I'm gonna put that in the B tier. I really like them. A lot of the new construction that you see today are borrowing elements from this. So next up we have the Prairie style home. This is gonna slide pretty firmly into our C spot. They feel very institutional for me. When I see them, I think police station, firehouse, municipal building. They're not thinking about the people living inside of them. They're not thinking about windows and layout. They're very concerned with interplay of the exterior look with the interior flow. And I think they missed the mark, pretty frankly. We find these all over the place and people are really excited about them. Why? Because they're pretty unique here in Chicago. You don't find them all over the place. So when people walk into a more interesting layout, something that they haven't seen in a long time, just by virtue of it being a little bit more rare. Next, we have the Raised Ranch. I'm gonna put that firmly in the D slot. I was a general contractor for a very long time. You always have this like lower level that they're trying to make feel like a living space. It's a basement. No matter how much you try to pretend like it's not a basement, it's a basement, and the whole house doesn't work unless you have like a true living space or a true dining area in your basement. Next, we have the split level. You're asking the main level to kind of do too much. You have like really shallow basements. I'm just not a huge fan of the split level or the Raised Ranch. They're my 2 least favorite in the city. Next up, we have the Victorian Queen Anne. That's actually gonna slide up all the way into the top spot for me. I have a soft spot for ornate details that you don't get to see very often. So columns and spires. Usually with these Victorian properties, you see a lot of them on corner lots just because they're so concerned with bringing in natural light. So that's how these are built. I love a front porch. Usually you have like a front and side wraparound porch. Big fan of them. I just don't think you can get anything kind of more classic than a spire. Like, who doesn't want to have a spire? And then finally, last but not least, we have the workers' cottage. We're gonna throw that in the B slot. The workers' cottage, obviously, you can tell by the name, they built them in droves to support the working class in Chicago. So there's a ton of them. They're just very normal. You see them all the time. These are those classic homes that you see that they dormer out. So they extend the pitched roof line to get more space up there. I think by definition, if you must put an addition on any particular style, that means it wasn't adequate. It may have worked, in the 1930s and 1940s for these workmen. It doesn't work now. I still think they're cool. They have great history. You see a ton of them, but you need to enhance them to make them work for the average person today. That was the tier list for Chicago vintage building types. If you disagree, let me know in the comments. We're doing a lot of these tier lists coming up. Like, subscribe, comment, tell me I'm full of shit if you don't agree with me, and stay tuned for the next one.